And good evening, I'm Rick Dancer. Welcome to Get Real with Rick Dancer. And tonight we are going to be talking timber. We talked last week about the HCPs with Jay Browning and Jen Hamaker, and we're not going to be talking about that tonight. We're going back to the fires. I'm sure most of you, especially in Oregon, well, here in Montana, we had a ton of fires as well. But Oregon was just, we got our butt kicked by the fires. And we're going to talk about that. But Matt Hill with the Douglas Timber Operators went out and produced a series of videos kind of looking at the aftermath, actually looking at the fire itself. And we've been airing these once every other month or so, and then having a group of people come on and talk about what that means and what's going on. So tonight we're going to talk about salvage. And at this point, anything that's left out there, it's too late. It's gone. And this story is going to explain a little bit about how that works. And then we're going to talk about that. So our sponsors tonight are Douglas Timber Operators, of course, and also Cristiano Family Dentistry, where everyone is welcome. Dr. Michael Bratlin, and he'll be talking a little bit later in the show, just a quick little blurb to kind of get us going. All right, let me air this story. I want you to see what we're talking about, and then we're going to have a conversation to enlighten all of us about what is going on and why it's so important to have good forest management, not what we're doing now.
My name is Brennan Gereltz. I work for Lone Rock Resources. I manage Lone Rock's logging company, and that's a company right now very involved with the recovery effort. The Archie Creek fire was pretty impactful to us. It was the largest fire that we've ever experienced in this area, and it was the largest fire to impact Lone Rock in our history. We're right below the bluffs of Mount Scott. We are fully into the recovery effort. What you see here today is we have one of our preferred contractor with Dancer Logging. They're in here cutting the dead trees and turning those trees into logs to send to the mill and get turned into lumber products that society can use. It's important as a part of the recovery effort to go through and grab as much of this as possible, because we need to get to it quickly before all the bugs, which love this black wood, try to get into it. If we can do that, we can preserve the value of them for us as a landowner, as a part of our business, but then we can start the next recovery effort of growing our next forest. So that's a matter of harvesting it first and then getting into planting, replanting with baby trees.
My name is Jim Dudley. I'm the Vice President of Resources for the Swanson Group. We're here at our Roseburg stud mill today. The company also owns 2 plywood plants, one in Springfield, Oregon, and another in Glendale, Oregon. Today we're going to watch some logs be scaled, debarked. Eventually we'll see them run through our in-dogging carriage, cut into cants, then cut into dimension lumber. We make 2x4, 2x6, 3x4, 3x6, 4x4, and 4x6 here in 8, 9, and 10-foot lengths. We're, primarily watching Doug fir that's come from the Archie Creek fire restoration. The bulk of what's moving today is wood that's coming off private landowners, mostly larger industrial landowners, but we have been able to help secure loggers for some smaller landowners that burned up. So we deck up the logs here in the log yard after they've been measured and scaled. We put the burnt logs into what we call a hot deck so that we can run them as fast as possible. And so we put them in the debarker. That removes the bulk of the bark from the log and a little bit of the char. From the debarker, we take it to the buck saws. The logs are scanned by length to get the maximum value yield out of the log. They move from the buck saws to the in-dogging carriage, where they're opened up into cants. They move from the band saws to the edgers, and the edgers take those 4 saw lines that are cut into 2-inch, 4-inch, or 6-inch cants. And they're further broken down into 2x4, 2x6s, 4x4s, 4x6s, and sent to the green sorter, where they're sorted by length, grade, dimension, and put on stickers to be sent to the dry kilns to be dried.
And joining me now, Brennan. Here's Brennan from Lone Rock Timber Company. Jim is from Swanson Brothers. Or is it Brothers? Swanson Group.
Yeah.
You could tell I've been in this around too long, huh? It used to be Swanson Brothers years ago. And Matt Hill from Douglas Timber Operators. So that's the number that, Matt, I love the way you did that, because the number that just sticks in my craw or stands out is 100,000 homes could have been built with everything that's burned out there.
Yeah, and that's just the Archie Creek fire in 2020, and there was other fires in Medford, up the Mackenzie, up the San Am. So the cumulative number is much higher, just for kind of one weather fire event in Western Oregon. But of course, the amount of wood removed from those burned areas is far less than that.
So Brennan, on your on Lone Rock property, is they go in there, you get as much as you can out of there, but how much do you have to leave behind?
Well, we have some regulatory obligations to leave behind some buffers, but ultimately it's a full out blitz to try and capture as much of that standing timber that has value as possible after a fire. But you get one important thing to remember, Rick, is that our lands, they're not all large standing merch, as we call it, trees, right, that we can send to the mill. There's thousands of acres out there of young trees that have absolutely no value at the mill. That's just, as a landowner, it's a complete loss for us of all that investment and time.
So, and then now when you go into replant, that's expensive too, isn't it? Because now you've got, because you guys are on a cycle. I think what a lot of people don't understand is, and this isn't like a cycle that's in 10 years, you're gonna cut down trees. This is a 40 to 50 year cycle that you're moving on. So when you wipe out, and so you have maybe a section that's 40 of trees that's 40 years down the road, and some that have already gotten to 30. So you're getting closer. You wipe all those out. You guys, you're stuck.
Yeah, we only can send to the mill that which meets the specs that the mills are after. So, those young trees out in your neck of woods, the juniper, the smaller trees, oftentimes those just don't have any value. So it's kind of like taking a 401k and just flushing it right down the toilet. We can't get any value out of that young stuff.
So Jim, how does this affect the manufacturing? Because I remember I toured the plant with you a couple of years ago, and right when this was going on, and you were bringing in truck after truck after truck, and everything was charred. But you guys, I think people don't realize how much value is in that timber.
Yeah, time is of the essence, and so if you can get on it quick, there's very little degradation to that wood at that point. But that changes fairly fast. They lose moisture obviously quicker than a live tree would in the summertime. So, in short order, you've got, dried wood that starts to split and check. And that's that's where you start seeing a drop off in volume and value recovery. But the wood that came off the Archie Creek fire actually held up really, really well, compared to what we've seen in far southern Oregon, where Jackson and Josephine County, with the fires that have occurred down there, the bugs were in that wood within 2 or 3 months, and it stains the lumber. There's active bugs in the wood, and so that's not something somebody wants to build a house out of. So even when you heat treat in a kiln and you've killed the bugs, those holes are still there, the stain is there, and those are the ones that end up on the floor of the Home Depot store.
So how much time do you have? I mean, realistically, to get that from the day the fire is put out to the time?
I'd say 18 months.
Really?
By the end of the second year, you're talking 20 to 30% of the fiber is lost at that point, just from the checking and any insect infestation that occurs. And so really you've got that winter, after the fires are out, into the following summer, and by the time you go through another winter, you're starting to see serious loss.
Go ahead, Brandon.
It's a decreasing, right? It's not at 18 months all of a sudden it's lost all its value at once. It slowly erodes. That value of what we can recover and send to the mill and have them pay for us is slowly degrading over those 18 months.
So what happens to this? May be a really weird question, but like if you have a set plan, like you guys have a business plan, that this stand is 40 years, this stand will be ready in 20 years, this stand is ready next year. Now all that's wiped out, or you go in and take everything you can. So where's the job security? Like if you're somebody who works in the mill, or you're a logger, and you know what I mean? It's like if you're planning, they're planning, now everything's wiped out. How does that work? I really want to know. I don't know.
Yeah, you shift gears. I mean, for an individual timber company, like Lone Rock, there's a big gap in age there that's going to affect your overall annual yield. As an industry, we try to do the best we can to move loggers and contractors into the fire and out of green timber. So, the net result of logging is still similar to what it would be on an annual basis. You're just moving contractors from green timber sales to fire salvage, but that has geographical impacts. Companies like Weyerhaeuser that lost 60,000-70,000 acres in the McKenzie River fire. They moved contractors off the coast, and so the mills that were on the coast weren't getting any logs, and we were all getting buried in them. So it does have impacts, but that's the best way you can manage these big events, is to try to move contractors around and make sure you're not cutting any green timber you don't have to.
And that's the short-term impacts that Jim just described. The real long-term impacts to the job security and the mills and wood flow, those are going to, from the 1 million acres that burned in Oregon in 2020, those are going to start to show up here in 20 years.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Get worse and worse until we're 45 years out. So
Matt, big picture stuff. What do we do as a state, as a West, as the industry? Because it seems to me we talk about affordable housing and we need housing. The affordable thing to do is not to import lumber from other countries. We have it right here. It feels like every time we turn around, we're at this place where the very people who want affordable housing, which is all of us, but also in the political realm, seem to be coming up with more restrictions on what we can do in the woods and how much timber we can harvest.
Well, certainly the approach on federal lands is failing by every possible evaluation. It's not working ecologically. These fires in Western Oregon incinerated land that had been set aside for habitat for threatened and endangered species for a generation. It's just gone. It's just back to zero, and there doesn't even seem to be a plan to recover the structure of those species. It doesn't work on the economic side because you have all this dead wood that's just standing there. It's going to rot. Someday it's going to reburn and threaten. You know, when Lone Rock has replanted its land, it's surrounded by dead wood, and 15, 20 years from now, it's facing an extremely high reburn risk. And then, of course, the social aspect of it too, which is, you know, we've got housing needs and all sorts of things that could be accommodated by, you know, a surge in production, and that just didn't happen.
So let me rephrase that so that people can understand, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So the very plan that was developed in the 90s to protect the spotted owl and other endangered species was destroyed. The plan that they came up with basically destroyed it because it left all this dead and dying timber on the ground, which you have a fire come through and it was just ready to ripe. So the land that you set aside for this owl to protect it actually gets destroyed by the protection plan.
And condemned to a future of staying in that burn reburn cycle. And what we're seeing up the North Umpqua and the South Umpqua in our part of Oregon is that on these federal lands, you get into this reburn cycle that takes out all the conifers and actually converts the site into brush, and there's no seeds left to regenerate. And after the Forest Service or BLM reforests it once, maybe twice, they're kind of done with it. And so after the third fire comes, it's just converted to brushland, and there's not spotted owls living in there. There's not deer and elk moving through there. It's really an awful, kind of nasty place. And so our goal of having, you know, well-balanced forests with diverse habitat is really being sacrificed by the single species management regime that was set up 30 years ago under the Northwest Forest Plan and enshrined in the current plans that we have now. Yet, you know, the environmental community doesn't seem to be concerned about this conversion. The courts don't seem to be concerned about it. It's just business as usual.
You know, there was a plan in Montana, there was a proposal, I don't know whatever happened to it, but if so many people go to lawsuits over wildlife. So one of the lawmakers proposed, and I think this would be great for timber, proposed that you would have to have a $500,000 bond in order to put a lawsuit against any, you know, in your case, in any timber sale. So it's fine. You still have the right and the ability to do this, but not like a sport. So they'd have to put some money in. So they have a little money in the game because you guys all have money in the game. And I thought that sounded really fair.
It would be, and that's those types of reforms are things that we talk about a lot. You know, I think unfortunately the regulatory rules and regime that federal land managers have to deal with it's impossible. Like, you know, and I'm not blaming the choices from our local land managers. In my opinion, they did a good job trying to do the most with the rules and regulations they had. They moved quickly. They didn't get bogged down in court, and they ultimately got some wood out, not much, but it is probably as much as they could under the circumstances. And so you've got to change those rules and what the American public and the set of laws expects out of those lands. And right now, you know, it's put a line around this and then just do nothing and expect it to always look like that. And that's really being challenged. And we need a more dynamic look at what we expect out of those lands to produce in terms of timber and water quality and habitat.
And Brendan, like your property, like you guys, if Lone Rock has this land and you guys keep yours, you know, that you keep it cleared, you thin it so that the fire danger is low, but your next door neighbor, the federal government, doesn't do the same thing, just lets it sit there. It's kind of useless because your property's in danger too.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, put it a little bit into context. It's kind of like if you live in town and your neighbor on the other side of the fence is just stacking gallons of gasoline over there. It makes us, we as a landowner in Southwest Oregon, especially in this fire prone environment, we incur a lot of risk. And It's worse for us. Actually, we have about 640 miles of shared boundary with the federal government, whether it's BLM or Forest Service, and that it's actually the same distance from Portland to San Francisco on I-5. So
And
that's a lot.
that's just Lone Rock land.
That's just Lone Rock land, and there's and interminx. It's alarming, it's scary, and we do what we can, but we're kind of limited on what we can get our neighbors to do.
Is maybe we need to develop an HOA,
Yeah.
a Forest Service HOA where you gotta take care of your neighbor's property too. Does it sometimes bug you, Brennan, that your job at Lone Rock, what you guys are doing is, and it never gets talked about, and I know I hammer on this, but I think you have to get the word out there to people. You are producing the biggest carbon filter that the Northwest, Oregon and Washington are creating carbon filters that are sucking carbon out of the air like you wouldn't even believe. So you are really the original environmental group that is working to do this, but yet the environmental groups don't want all this going on. They just want to let it sit there. And don't older trees, I don't know if it's like people. I don't know if they suck up as much carbon as younger trees. I have no idea. You could tell me that. I have no idea.
No, they're not as productive at capturing atmospheric carbon. They're not as young trees, and so that plant grow and turn it into stored carbon in the form of wood products is frankly the best way we can do anything to manage climate change and atmospheric carbon.
And then always like the statement, we take air pollution and turn it into housing for humanity.
That's absolutely right.
We're doing good things and never get credit for it.
Right, so Brennan is growing the carbon sequesterer, and then Jim, you're making it into these carbon storage bins. Yeah. And then the cool thing is then and we're seeing that the most sustainable way to build, even I'm seeing stuff with Ferris lumber and stuff. They're building 10-story buildings out of wood frames. Yeah. And so because that's way more efficient and carbon efficient than steel, which is currently used in most buildings. So we're starting to find wood is really the more natural way, and it stores the carbon at the same time. And yet the environmental community will not start talking about this because it's the truth and it's how it is.
Yeah. Well, think about some of the homes on the East Coast. You've got homes that were built 400 years ago out of trees that never would have lived for 400 years. So, I mean, it is sustainable. And again, the society doesn't talk about those benefits as much as we'd like them to.
I'll add to that is that in the West and in the United States, frankly, we have some of the most strict and best land use laws for managing our forests in the entire world. And if we're not doing it here, we're just exporting environmental degradation someplace else. Nobody wants it in their backyard, so send it to South America, send it to Russia, where they don't have rules. And we can do it better here and be a part of the solution.
Oh, it's kind of like the fossil fuel industry. If we don't do it on the grounds of the United States, then it doesn't count as pollution, as taking off the carbon footprint. So what's going to end up happening, and people should understand this, is if you guys can't produce enough lumber or timber to make lumber to build houses, and they're exporting it from other countries, those countries do not take care of that timber and that land the way we do.
That's at right. All. We have to have a healthy market, and that means investment. That Jim needs certainty to be able to run his sawmills, and I need a healthy market to just reinvest back into the land because it's not cheap to grow trees.
And the thing I think that's really interesting about your part of it, Brennan, with Lone Rock, is you're planting trees today, and no offense, I mean, you're a very young man, I'm sure, but you probably won't even see the results of, the work, and your owners definitely won't see the results of their work ever, because this is like you're you're planting into the future. It's not like a farm crop where you cut it down at the end of the season. This is stuff that, this is out in the future, 40, 50, 60 years.
That's absolutely right. Every decision we make, and this is ubiquitous for most foresters, but every decision we make, we're making for the future. And we're not going to be necessarily the ones to reap the benefits of those decisions, or in some cases, have to deal with them.
So Matt, what can people do at this point to hammer this message home because obviously it has to change at the national level. But also even here with HCP, the Habitat Conservation Plan, it's kind of stalled because of pressure from people, but that could throw a whole new monkey wrench in everything with state lands. And we've had shows on that. But what do people do at the state level and the federal level? What can we do as people? Obviously it matters who we vote for.
It matters who you vote for, and elections have consequences, and those consequences get turned into laws, and those laws are then implemented on forests. And I think right now at the federal level, there is an opportunity to change the direction a little bit. You've got a mixed Congress with a Republican House, slight Democrat majority in the Senate. I think there's going to be more discussion about federal forest management in the Farm Bill and other legislation moving through Congress that might give us an opportunity to move the needle a little bit, and maybe change how the feds approach fire, how they approach recovery after the fire, and firefighting itself. There will be administrative processes to review forest plans, like the Northwest Forest Plan, which covers virtually all the federal forests in Western Oregon, Washington, Northern California, and the public will have an opportunity to comment on those. And I think at the most raw level, at least here in Oregon, most of our elected members of Congress have town hall meetings, and they're driving through these burn areas. And I think people need to say, this is not acceptable. This is not what we want our federal lands to look like, and we need to do better. And how are you going to make it better? And just put it in their lap.
It's really changing the narrative in the conversation, because I think what I noticed when I was living in Oregon, especially up the McKenzie River, and I'm sure you saw this where you are, when it gets that close to your home, it's kind of like burglary victims. Nobody cares about it until it happens to you. And all of a sudden, then it becomes real important when you start. But we don't want the whole state of Oregon or Montana or Washington State to have to burn up so that everybody gets on the board. I think it's really doing their homework and finding out if we say we want to protect the environment, then are we really doing that with all the tools that are there? Or are we putting it in danger by not doing something that sounds and feels good? Because sounds and feels good is not going to do it. It has to be factual and science. We heard so much about following the science, and yet even with timber industry stuff, we're not following the science.
Well, and we were told, I worked on Capitol Hill many years ago, and it was recreation versus timber at that point, and just stop logging and let the recreation economy take over. And here in Western Oregon, that there certainly are recreational opportunities, but the impact of fire is just on the recreational side of things.
Right.
The North Umpqua Trail has been closed for years because of impacts of multiple fires. Like, it hasn't been continuously open probably in over a decade. It affects rafting. It affects, your hiking. It affects your mountain biking. It affects your breathing. So you can't go out and recreate for 3 months of the year. And so, regardless of what your interest is, whether it's timber or recreation or endangered species protection, this isn't working for anyone. And we need a totally different paradigm to figure out how to get it right.
That's a super great point. And I think the one you forgot was we all care about the environment, and we're doing the exact opposite. We're not using our resources, which are the damn trees, the carbon sequesters, and the answer is right there growing. And we're letting it, and what people don't understand is how much carbon went into the air after the fires 2 or 3 years ago.
Well, the answer is more than all the carbon emissions from the electric and transportation sectors combined for that year for Oregon.
You would not know how many times I use that at party conversation with people. When some environmentalist comes and says, well, blah, blah, blah. And I go, do you know? And then you should see a gap. They get real quiet. Oh, Tom says, well said, Matt. Matt knows how to talk. Anything else people should know that's coming up that they need to be aware of? I mean, I think half of this is awareness, education, and then talking about it to your friends. Don't be afraid to speak up and say to people when you're at a conversation with people that, why are we doing this? Because, I was saying to somebody the other day, I don't remember 10 years ago, I didn't have to plan my summer around forest fires or my vacations around smoke. And now from Montana to Idaho to Wyoming to Oregon to Washington to Northern California, it's become an environmental and a health hazard to be out in the summer.
Yep.
Unbelievable.
Well, you've got, the North Umpqua was the largest late successional reserve in the Northwest Forest Plan. That was the biggest chunk of old growth timber set aside, and we've burned up 30% of it already. It's, we're loving it to death. And, I think all of us want to see balance. The thing I think a lot of people don't understand, and you touched on it a little bit with the lawsuits, but that's a money maker. I mean, everybody that claims to be an environmentalist, they get to use the pure card, and you look at groups like the Center for Biological Diversity, they run around the entire United States, trying to file lawsuits. They think they've got a chance of winning on a technicality, and they get all their lawyer fees back. And I think the Ninth Circuit, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but it allows for the most money of any of our courts. Because those are environmental lawyers, and so they're worth $450 an hour. I think everywhere else they're only allowed to charge $250 an hour. So
it's so corrupt.
You got some kid fresh out of law school that's isn't making hardly anything, and yet they're billed out at $450 an hour. And if they claim it's not about the money, they're full of it.
Yeah, that's horrible. It's so corrupt. And what makes me so mad is it's really not what's best for the environment.
No.
And it just tying it, or affordable housing, all these things that they say they want. Well, then put your freaking money where your mouth is and start showing. I mean, start acting, not feeling. And I think that's what we all need to do. Especially, my friends in Oregon, is, stop thinking with God gave you a brain and a heart to make them both work together. Because so many people don't let the brain attach to the heart. And then all you do is, oh, well, this sounds good. This is what we should do. Well, at the same time, you're destroying the very thing you're trying to protect. And that is not smart.
Right.
And the trajectory is really bad and frightening. Here in the Umpqua region, over 40% of the Umpqua National Forest is burned in about 20 years. The BLM, isn't too far off of that. So, in another 20 years, theoretically, all of it will have burned once or twice. And in the places where it's turning into brush or some other type of forest stand, it's really going to change the face of the forest and how it functions and the wildlife it can support. And I think, if you would have asked someone 20 years ago, would you see the entire national forest burn within your lifetime? You'd think they're crazy.
Right.
But we are facing that now. And I don't think, the powers that be have totally grasped what's coming, because we're in the beginning of that fire phase. But as these large swaths of land, and I'm talking like hundreds of thousands of acres at a time that have already burned, they're standing dead, air-dried firewood. As that starts to fall down and re-burn again with heavy, flashy fuels under it, it's going to be a real mess, and it's going to be disastrous. And there's not a great plan in place for that right now.
Well, I'll add that also that fire scar that's out there. Lone Rock actively engages in a lot of fire suppression along with ODF and our local wildland firefighting agencies. And it's so dangerous in those fire scars, we can't send firefighters in, right? It is literally life-threatening dangerous. And so the chances of being able to successfully keep a fire really small it's way harder and far more dangerous for our firefighters out there.
So Brennan, explain to people real quickly why it's so dangerous on that particular that's been burned and just left because of the snags and all the stuff in there. I'm afraid a lot of viewers they've never been out there and they just think, oh, well, fire's dangerous. No, this is something bigger than that. So would you explain that?
Yeah, it has to do with a lot that, you don't have a healthy forest coming back in. You have a lot of shrub species that are small, and shrub species are highly flammable, explosively flammable, some of them. And then the other part is that you have all these snags standing, and they're prone to falling down. They're weakened. They're not, they're dead. And when a snag falls, you can't hear it falling. It doesn't fall like a green tree. It falls very silently. And all that just means that when a fire's in there, it can either be explosively growing or things can be burning and a tree can hit you from 300 feet away.
Yeah.
And it's just too dangerous. And that's because of the lack of management.
Perfect. That's what I just want people, because I want to dig into this stuff so people kind of have an idea. Every Oregonian should go out with a logging crew. You know what I mean? I think that would be the greatest thing. And Brennan, I do have to make one point. You obviously hire the best loggers that you can, because I understand you did hire Dancer Logging. And they I heard that name and I was like they did give me a sweatshirt. I called the dancers and I said, you guys, hey, I don't know if we're related, but I've never met other dancers. And do you guys have any paraphernalia? And they gave me a super nice sweatshirt that says Dancer Logging. And so sometimes I wear that when I go on an environmental story.
They're a good crew and a great family. They've been in the industry for a long time.
Good people. You guys, thank you for taking your time and coming on here and digging into this a little bit. I know sometimes it's hard for people but I think we have to keep digging to get something plowed up so people start to understand that we can do this way better, a lot better, and we need to.
Yep.
All right.
That's Rick.
All right. Thanks, you guys. Again, thanks for your time. I appreciate you. Matt, thank you. I already got Matt out of there at the order. So it really is up to us in the West, in Montana, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, California, Nevada. We have to be involved in this, because we shouldn't be living in a place where this goes on year after year after year. And we preach affordable housing and we're destroying the very product that we could make for those people who we want to be in homes, to have a home. And that doesn't make sense. And then the very animals we say we're trying to protect, we're actually destroying with our stupid plans that don't work, and our policies that don't work. So do you see the hypocrisy in all of this? I mean, it's unbelievable, and it just fits in with what's going on. But we can change this stuff. We can. So how you vote matters. Who you vote for matters. Find out what their policy is on that. Find out how serious they are about climate change. If we're serious about climate change, then shouldn't we be planting more trees? Shouldn't we be cleaning up trees that are dying? Because when trees rot and die, they also put carbon in the air. We don't want more carbon in the air. So if you're serious about carbon reduction, then let's do some stuff that reduces the carbon, shall we? And not just talk about it, but actually do something. All right, I'm Rick Dancer. That's it for tonight. Tomorrow night, we have, there's a program here in Montana. The sheriff here in Broadwater County is talking about suicide prevention. We're going to talk real personally about it, and we're going to tell you about a meeting going on here. But this is also valuable information for everybody in our viewing audience, because he gets very real about it. And that's coming up tomorrow night. And then on Thursday, we'll have Brian Miskimmons coming in to talk about the nice weather that's finally arrived and the snow that's gone. And we're also going to talk to Bill London to find out what's going on nationally in the news and right here. And then one other thing you might do, be interesting if you want to comment. I'd love to see how you feel, and not to get political with all this, but I'm not going to take a stand on it. But we got, and President Biden announced today that he's running for office. So if Trump is the front line for the Republicans and Biden is for the Democrats, just write in here. I'd be curious to know who you support in this election. If these are the two men. One other thing I brought up on my page that I'm just going to tag out here with, because I think it's kind of funny. We are such a diverse nation, right? We have so many intelligent and great people, and yet we can only seem to come up with old white men to be president. I'm laughing because it's better than crying. But, there's so much that needs to change. There's so much. All right. Have a good night. Share this on your page so other people can get educated about the timber industry and about what we want to do to truly prevent the climate and protect the climate.